The crystal chandelier in the Blackwell Estates dining room had witnessed 3 generations of family drama, but nothing quite prepared it for what was about to unfold on this particular Tuesday evening. 24-year-old Madison Blackwell sat at the mahogany table, her designer blazer perfectly pressed, her auburn hair swept into a corporate-ready chignon, completely oblivious that her carefully planned life was about to get turned upside down like a snow globe in an earthquake. "More wine, darling." Her mother, Victoria Blackwell, glided around the table with the grace of someone who'd attended finishing school in Switzerland and never let anyone forget it. The woman could make pouring wine look like a diplomatic summit. "I'm good, Mom. Actually, I need to head back to the office tonight. The Henderson merger won't close itself." Madison checked her Apple Watch, a nervous habit she'd developed since joining her father's investment firm straight out of Wharton. "Oh, sweetie, work can wait." Victoria's smile had that peculiar quality of expensive porcelain. Beautiful, but potentially deadly if it shattered. "Your father and I have some wonderful news to share." From the kitchen came a tremendous crash, followed by what sounded like a small explosion. Madison jumped, nearly knocking over her water glass. "Holy smokes, what was that?" "Don't worry about it, dear," Victoria said smoothly, not even glancing toward the kitchen. "Grandma Rose is just helping with dinner preparations." Another crash echoed through the house, this one accompanied by what distinctly sounded like an elderly woman yelling, "Well, butter my biscuit. Where did that darn thing roll off to?" Madison's father, Robert Blackwell III, emerged from his study, loosening his Hermes tie with the weary expression of a man who'd spent 40 years building a financial empire and was beginning to suspect his family might be plotting to burn it down for the insurance money. "Is she trying to renovate the kitchen with a wrecking ball?" he asked, settling into his chair at the head of the table. "She's making her famous apple pie," Victoria explained, as if this clarified everything. "Famous for what? Structural damage?" Before Victoria could respond, the kitchen door swung open, and Grandma Rose burst through like a silver-haired tornado wearing a flour-dusted apron that read, "Kiss the cook if you dare." At 78, Rose Fitzgerald still had the energy of a woman half her age and twice the mischief of someone who'd learned that life was too short to worry about consequences. "Did I miss anything important?" She plopped down in her chair, somehow managing to look both innocent and guilty simultaneously. A streak of what appeared to be cinnamon decorated her left cheek. "Actually, Grandma, you're right on time," Victoria said, her smile brightening to weapons-grade intensity. "We were just about to tell Madison about the Montgomery family." Madison's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "The Montgomery family? As in Montgomery Holdings? Dad, please tell me you're not thinking of acquiring them. Their quarterly reports look like abstract art, colorful but completely meaningless." Robert chuckled. "No acquisition, sweetheart. This is more personal." The word personal in the Blackwell household usually meant one of two things. Either someone was getting divorced or someone was getting married. Given that her parents seemed unusually happy, Madison felt her stomach drop like a stone through water. "Personal how?" Victoria clasped her hands together with the enthusiasm of someone unveiling a surprise party. "Well, darling, you know how we've always valued tradition in this family." "Oh, no." Madison's fork clattered to her plate. "No, no, no. Please tell me this isn't going where I think it's going. And the Montgomerys are such a lovely family. Old money, excellent breeding, and their son Alexander just returned from London after finishing his MBA at Oxford." "Mom," Madison's voice cracked like ice on a frozen lake. "Are you seriously trying to set me up right now? I haven't even had dessert yet." Rose perked up like a bloodhound catching a scent. "Ooh, is this about that handsome boy with the fancy car? The one who looks like he stepped out of a Ralph Lauren catalog? You've met him?" Madison turned to her grandmother with the expression of someone who'd just discovered her sweet old granny was actually running an underground matchmaking cartel. "Well, I may have bumped into him at the country club," Rose said with studied casualness. "Literally bumped into him. Spilled my entire mint julep right down his crisp white polo shirt. Poor boy was drenched from collar to hemline." Victoria shot her mother-in-law a look that could have frozen Hell's Kitchen. "Mother Rose, we discussed this." "Discussed what?" Madison's voice had risen to what her college roommate used to call her courtroom octave. "What exactly have you all been discussing behind my back?" Robert cleared his throat with the diplomatic finesse of someone about to announce either a merger or a declaration of war. Madison, sweetheart, what your mother is trying to say is that we've arranged for you to meet Alexander Montgomery. Socially, with the intention of, well, marriage, Victoria finished triumphantly, as if she'd just solved world hunger. Isn't it exciting? The silence that followed was so profound that even the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to hold its breath. Madison stared at her parents with the wide-eyed horror of someone who'd just been told she'd been enrolled in a reality TV show without her consent. I'm sorry, what? She finally managed. Did you just say marriage? As in, till death do us part? White dress? Throwing bouquets marriage? Now, before you get all worked up, Robert said, holding up his hands in the universal gesture of, please don't throw anything expensive. This isn't exactly arranged in the medieval sense. You'll have plenty of time to get to know each other before any formal announcements. How much time? Madison's voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper. Victoria's smile flickered like a light bulb with loose wiring. Well, we were thinking 6 months, maybe 8 if you really need it. 8 months? Madison shot up from her chair so fast it nearly toppled backward. You want me to marry a complete stranger in 8 months? Have you all completely lost your marbles? Rose, who had been suspiciously quiet during this exchange, suddenly piped up. Oh, he's not a complete stranger, dear. I know quite a bit about him now. Such as? Madison turned to her grandmother with the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, someone in this family had retained their sanity. Rose's eyes twinkled with the kind of mischief that had probably gotten her into trouble since the Truman administration. Well, for starters, he's got excellent reflexes. When I spilled that julep on him, he didn't even flinch. Just smiled and asked if I was all right. Very gentlemanly. And he's got these green eyes that remind me of your grandfather's. Rest his soul. Except your grandfather's were brown, but the principle's the same. Madison stared at her grandmother. Grandma, that makes absolutely no sense. Neither does wearing white after Labor Day, but people do it anyway, Rose replied cheerfully. This is insane. Madison began pacing behind her chair like a caged tiger in designer heels. I have a career. I have goals. I have a 5-year plan that doesn't include marrying some trust fund prince I've never met. Alexander isn't exactly a trust fund prince, Robert interjected. He's been working at Montgomery Holdings since he graduated. From what I understand, he's quite the entrepreneur. Started his own tech consulting firm on the side. Oh, wonderful. A workaholic with daddy issues and a side hustle. Exactly what every girl dreams of. Victoria's expression shifted to what Madison recognized as her disappointed but determined face. The same look she'd worn when convincing Madison to attend cotillion instead of computer camp in 8th grade. Madison, darling, I know this seems sudden, but marriage isn't just about romance. It's about partnership, stability, building something together. And the Montgomery alliance would be incredibly beneficial for both families. Alliance? Madison stopped pacing. Are we forming a military coalition or planning a wedding? Because I'm getting mixed signals here. Rose suddenly clapped her hands together with explosive enthusiasm. Oh, I almost forgot the best part. I offered to help with the wedding preparations. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Victoria's face went pale. Mother Rose, she said carefully, what kind of help did you offer? Oh, you know, the usual grandmother duties. I told them I'd make the wedding dress. I still have my sewing machine from 1965. Works like a dream. And I'd handle the catering and maybe organize some pre-wedding activities to help the young lovebirds get acquainted. Madison felt the color drain from her face. Grandma, with all due respect, the last time you helped with a family event, Cousin Jennifer's engagement party ended with the fire department, 3 paramedics, and a very confused pelican. That was a completely different situation, Rose protested. And the pelican was fine. He seemed to enjoy the salmon pâté. The salmon pâté was on fire, Grandma. Details, Rose waved dismissively. This will be much simpler. How hard can it be to plan a wedding? The question hung in the air like a sword over everyone's head. Victoria looked like she was mentally calculating the insurance coverage on the family estate. Robert appeared to be contemplating early retirement to a nice, quiet monastery. And Madison felt like she was watching her orderly life transform into a sitcom written by someone with a very twisted sense of humor. Okay, Madison said slowly, sinking back into her chair. Let me see if I understand this correctly. You've arranged for me to marry a man I've never met, given us less than a year to fall in love, and put Grandma in charge of wedding planning. Have I got that right? When you put it like that, it sounds almost adventurous, Rose beamed. Grandma, the Titanic was adventurous. That doesn't mean it ended well. Victoria reached across the table and patted Madison's hand with maternal confidence. Sweetheart, I know it seems overwhelming, but trust me. Your father and I have been married for 28 years, and we had an arranged introduction too. Look how wonderfully that worked out. Madison glanced between her parents, her father currently hiding behind his wineglass, and her mother sporting the kind of determined optimism usually reserved for people about to jump out of perfectly good airplanes. That's actually not as reassuring as you think it is, Mom. The point is, Victoria continued, sometimes the heart needs a little guidance to find its way, and who better to provide that guidance than family? Another tremendous crash echoed from the kitchen, followed by what sounded suspiciously like Rose's voice yelling, "Well, I'll be hornswoggled. That's not supposed to smoke like that." Everyone turned to look at Rose, who was still sitting innocently at the table, her hands folded primly in her lap. "Wasn't me," she said cheerfully. "That must be the pie timer going off." Very enthusiastically. Madison buried her face in her hands. "This is really happening, isn't it? You're all completely serious about this." "Dead serious," Robert confirmed. "The Montgomery boy is coming for dinner this Friday night. Consider it a getting-to-know-you session. A blind date with marriage is the end goal," Madison translated. "Exactly." Madison looked up at her family, her well-meaning, completely insane family, and felt something between hysteria and resignation settle in her chest. Her perfectly planned life had just been hijacked by people who thought arranged marriage was a reasonable solution to her single status. "Fine," she said finally. "Fine. I'll meet him. But I'm not promising anything beyond basic civility and proper table manners." Rose clapped her hands with glee. "Oh, this is going to be so much fun. I have so many ideas for the dinner. We could do a theme, maybe getting to know you with little conversation starter cards at each place setting." "Absolutely not," Madison said quickly. "Or charades. Everyone loves charades." "Grandma, if you turn my first meeting with this man into a party game, I will personally donate your sewing machine to charity." Rose gasped in mock horror. "You wouldn't dare. Try me." Victoria intervened before the threat could escalate further. "Mother Rose, perhaps we should keep Friday's dinner simple. Just family style, nothing fancy." "Simple," Rose agreed readily. "I can do simple. Simple is my middle name. Well, actually, it's Gertrude. But simple works too." Madison felt a headache beginning to form behind her eyes. What could possibly go wrong? She muttered. Rose's face lit up with inspiration. "Oh, I should probably mention, I already started working on your dress." "My what now?" "Your wedding dress. I found this gorgeous pattern in one of my old magazines. Very vintage, very elegant. Though I may have miscalculated the measurements just a tiny bit." Madison's voice rose to near soprano levels. "Grandma, please tell me you haven't already started sewing a wedding dress for a marriage that hasn't even been agreed to yet." "Well, when you put it like that, it sounds presumptuous," Rose admitted. "But I prefer to think of it as optimistically prepared." Robert and Victoria exchanged the kind of look that usually passed between parents when they realized their child had just agreed to something that would either result in a beautiful wedding or a family legend that would be told for generations. Madison slumped back in her chair, staring at the chandelier that had witnessed so much family drama over the years. She wondered if it had ever seen anything quite like this. "You know what?" she said finally. "At this point, I'm just curious to see what happens. It's like watching a train wreck in slow motion, but with better catering and formal wear." Rose beamed with triumph. "That's the spirit, dear. And don't you worry about a thing. Grandma Rose is going to make sure this is the most memorable wedding preparation in Blackwell family history." Madison looked at her grandmother's enthusiastic face and felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "Grandma," she said slowly, "when you say memorable, do you mean that in a good way or in a we'll be talking about this in therapy for years way?" Rose's smile was positively angelic. "Oh, sweetie, with me involved, is there really a difference?" As if summoned by her words, the smoke detector in the kitchen began wailing like a banshee, and the distinct smell of something very expensive burning began to drift through the house. Madison looked around the table at her family, her father reaching for his emergency antacids, her mother calculating damage control, and her grandmother sitting serenely in the middle of the chaos like the eye of a perfectly dressed hurricane. "Friday night," she said to herself. "I'm meeting my arranged almost fiancé on Friday night. What could possibly go wrong?" Friday evening arrived with all the subtlety of a freight train carrying fireworks. Madison stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting her navy blue dress for the 15th time in 10 minutes, wondering if there was a specific etiquette guide for meeting your arranged almost fiancé. Emily Post probably never covered how to make small talk with a stranger your parents want you to marry. "Breathe, Madison," she told her reflection. "He's probably just as horrified about this whole situation as you are." From downstairs came the unmistakable sound of Grandma Rose orchestrating what could generously be called dinner preparations, and more accurately be described as controlled demolition with a culinary theme. "Victoria!" Rose's voice carried through the house with the force of a foghorn. "Where do you keep the good china? The stuff that doesn't chip when you look at it funny?" Madison winced. She'd specifically requested simple, remember? Apparently, Rose's definition of simple was like her definition of quiet, purely theoretical. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend Casey. "How's the arranged marriage victim holding up? Should I start planning your escape route or your bachelorette party?" Madison typed back. "Escape route. Definitely escape route. If I'm not at the office by Monday, assume I've been absorbed into some kind of matrimonial witness protection program." Another crash echoed from downstairs, followed by Rose's cheerful voice. "No worries. That was just the decorative stuff." Madison's phone buzzed again. This time it was from her mother. "Alexander just pulled into the driveway. Come down when you're ready, sweetheart. And please try to look approachable." "Approachable," Madison muttered, checking her lipstick one last time. Not terrified of commitment or plotting an escape to Costa Rica, just approachable. She took a deep breath and headed downstairs, where she could already hear voices in the foyer. Her father's diplomatic businessman tone, her mother's perfectly modulated hostess voice, and underneath it all, Rose's enthusiastic chatter about something involving proper introductions and family traditions. Madison paused at the top of the staircase, suddenly aware that the next few minutes would either be pleasantly awkward or spectacularly disastrous. With her family's track record, she wasn't placing any bets on pleasant. She descended the stairs with as much grace as she could muster, which admittedly wasn't much, considering her hands were shaking like leaves in a hurricane. Through the foyer archway, she could see the back of a tall figure in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, dark hair that looked like it had been styled by someone who charged by the strand, and shoulders that suggested he actually used his gym membership for more than just the smoothie bar. "Alexander, I'd like you to meet our daughter, Madison," Victoria was saying as Madison reached the bottom of the stairs. The man turned around, and Madison's first coherent thought was that Grandma Rose's description had been surprisingly accurate. He did look like he'd stepped out of a Ralph Lauren catalog. Her second thought was that his green eyes were indeed quite striking, though she wasn't sure about the grandfather comparison since she'd never actually met her grandfather. Her third thought was that he looked just as uncomfortable as she felt, which was oddly reassuring. "Madison," he said, stepping forward with his hand extended. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you. I've heard so much about you." His voice had that crisp, educated quality that came from good schools and better breeding, but there was something underneath it, a hint of dry humor maybe, or possibly suppressed panic. Madison decided to go with humor. "All good things, I hope," she replied, shaking his hand. "Though knowing my family, they probably told you I could juggle flaming torches while reciting Shakespeare." Alexander's mouth quirked upward in what might have been the beginning of a genuine smile. "Actually, they mentioned something about investment banking and a 5-year plan. The torch juggling sounds more interesting." "Oh, I save that for special occasions," Madison found herself saying. "Like arranged marriages and natural disasters. Is there a difference?" Before Madison could respond, Rose burst through the dining room doors like a silver-haired whirlwind carrying what appeared to be a silver serving tray loaded with enough appetizers to feed a small army. "Alexander, darling," she called out, apparently forgetting that she was carrying approximately 15 pounds of food and fine china. I made your favorites. My favorites? Alexander looked puzzled. But we've never actually… Of course we have. At the country club, you told me you loved those little spinach puff things. Madison watched in growing horror as Rose approached at full speed, her attention focused entirely on Alexander and not at all on the antique Persian rug that had been in the Blackwell family since the Roosevelt administration. The first Roosevelt. Grandma, Madison started to warn, but it was too late. Rose's foot caught the edge of the rug, and suddenly everything happened in slow motion, like an expensive disaster movie directed by someone with a very twisted sense of humor. The silver tray launched into the air with the grace of a caffeinated eagle, sending spinach puffs, bacon-wrapped scallops, and what appeared to be some kind of cheese-filled pastry flying in every direction. Alexander, displaying reflexes that would have made a professional athlete weep with envy, lunged forward and caught Rose before she could hit the marble floor. Unfortunately, this put him directly in the trajectory of the airborne appetizers, which proceeded to rain down on both of them like the world's most expensive food fight. Madison watched in fascination as a bacon-wrapped scallop landed squarely on Alexander's head, balanced there for a moment like a tiny, overpriced hat, then slid down his forehead and plopped onto his shoe. A spinach puff bounced off his shoulder and rolled under the console table, where it would probably be discovered by the housekeeping staff sometime next week. "Well, butter my biscuit," Rose exclaimed, still cradled in Alexander's arms, like the heroine of a very confused romance novel. "That's the second time I've made a mess on you, isn't it, dear?" Alexander, who now had bits of pastry in his hair and what appeared to be spinach dip on his jacket lapel, looked down at Rose with an expression of bemused acceptance. "Actually, I think this might be a new record," he said calmly, helping her regain her footing. "Are you all right, Mrs. Fitzgerald?" "Oh, please call me Grandma Rose. And I'm fine as frog's hair, honey. Just a little embarrassed about redecorating your suit with my cooking." Victoria appeared in the doorway with the expression of someone who had just witnessed the collision of her worst fears and her mother-in-law's best intentions. "Mother Rose," she said in a voice that could have cut diamonds, "what exactly were you trying to accomplish?" "I was bringing out the appetizers. You know, to break the ice, help the young folks get acquainted." Rose beamed with the unshakable confidence of someone who had just turned a formal introduction into a food-based catastrophe and somehow considered this a victory. Madison found herself fighting back laughter. It was either laugh or run screaming from the house, and laughing seemed less likely to result in a family intervention. "I'm so sorry," she said to Alexander, who was attempting to brush pastry crumbs out of his hair with limited success. "My grandmother has a unique approach to hospitality." "Unique is certainly one word for it," Alexander replied, but he was smiling now. A genuine, amused smile that transformed his whole face from catalog perfect to actually human. "Though I have to admit, this is definitely the most memorable first meeting I've ever had." "Oh, this is just the appetizer course," Madison said without thinking. "Wait until you see what she has planned for dinner." The words were out of her mouth before she could stop them, and she realized with growing horror that she'd just implied he'd be staying for the entire evening, which presumed that getting pelted with flying food hadn't completely scared him off. But Alexander just laughed, a rich, genuine sound that made something flutter unexpectedly in Madison's chest. "Well, now I'm curious," he said. "Does she always use aerial delivery for the main course, or is that reserved for special occasions?" Rose clapped her hands together with delight, apparently taking this as a sign of approval. "Oh, you two are getting along like a house on fire. This is wonderful." "Let's hope not literally," Robert muttered, appearing behind Victoria with the resigned expression of a man who had learned to expect the unexpected and prepare accordingly. "Alexander, I apologize for my mother-in-law's enthusiastic welcome." "Please don't apologize," Alexander said, finally managing to extract most of the food debris from his person. "In my experience, the best families are the ones that keep you on your toes." Madison studied his face, looking for signs of polite insincerity or barely concealed horror, but he seemed genuinely unfazed by the chaos. Either he was an excellent actor, or he'd had some experience with family-related disasters. "Are you speaking from experience?" she asked. "You could say that. My family has their own interesting traditions, though they tend to involve less flying food and more flying accusations about whose fault it is that the soufflé collapsed." Souffle drama? Madison raised an eyebrow. That sounds ominously sophisticated. You have no idea. My mother once canceled Christmas dinner because my aunt brought store-bought dinner rolls. The family is still divided into pro-roll and anti-roll factions. Madison felt herself relax slightly. A man who could joke about family dysfunction while wearing spinach dip on his sleeve was either remarkably adaptable or completely insane. Either way, it was more promising than she'd expected. Well, she said, I can promise you that our family drama involves significantly less haute cuisine and significantly more creative problem-solving. As if summoned by her words, Rose piped up from where she'd been collecting scattered appetizers off the floor. Oh, speaking of creative, Alexander, dear, I've been working on something special for you two. Madison felt her stomach drop. Grandma, please tell me you haven't... I've been working on Madison's wedding dress. I know it's a little premature, but I couldn't help myself. I found the most gorgeous pattern from 1962. Very Jackie Kennedy. Very elegant. Though I may have made a few creative adjustments. The silence that followed was profound enough to make the grandfather clock sound like a marching band. Wedding dress, Alexander repeated slowly. Already. Well, I like to be prepared, Rose said cheerfully, apparently oblivious to the fact that both Madison and Alexander had gone slightly pale. Though I should probably mention that I may have miscalculated the measurements just a teensy bit. The hem might be a little higher than traditional. Madison closed her eyes and counted to 10 in 3 different languages. When she opened them, Alexander was looking at her with an expression that might have been sympathy or might have been shared terror. It was hard to tell. How much higher are we talking? Victoria asked with the careful tone of someone defusing a bomb. Oh, nothing scandalous. Rose waved dismissively. Just fashionably modern. Very 1960s mod. Though it might be better suited for a cocktail party than a church ceremony. But that's what alterations are for. Madison looked at Alexander, who was looking back at her with raised eyebrows and barely suppressed amusement. Somewhere in the space between his diplomatic smile and her grandmother's enthusiastic destruction, she realized that this whole situation was so absurd it had crossed the line from mortifying into genuinely funny. You know what? She said, surprising herself. At this point, I think we should just lean into the chaos. Alexander, would you like to stay for dinner? I can't promise the food will actually reach your plate, but I can guarantee it will be memorable. Alexander's smile widened into something that made her pulse skip unexpectedly. I wouldn't miss it for the world, though I should probably ask, should I be prepared for any other aerial assaults, or was that just the opening act? Rose looked thoughtful. Well, I did experiment with a new recipe for the main course. Grandma, Madison said quickly, maybe we should stick to things that are traditionally served with gravity working in our favor. Oh, pish-posh, Rose dismissed with a wave. Where's your sense of adventure? Besides, I'm almost certain I figured out what went wrong with the flambé. Alexander turned to Madison with an expression of delighted horror. Flambé? I'm beginning to think you're either very brave or very foolish for agreeing to stay, Madison told him. Maybe a little of both, he admitted. But I have a feeling that boring is not going to be a problem with your family. From the kitchen came the sound of what might have been a small explosion, followed by Rose's voice calling out, Everything's under control! That's supposed to make that noise! Madison looked at Alexander. Alexander looked at Madison, and they both burst into laughter at exactly the same time. Welcome to the Blackwell family, Madison said, when she could breathe again. We specialize in memorable experiences and property damage. Good to know, Alexander replied, still grinning. I'll adjust my insurance coverage accordingly. And despite everything, the arranged marriage, the flying appetizers, the promise of more culinary disasters to come, Madison found herself thinking that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't going to be the complete catastrophe she'd expected. Of course, that was before the smoke alarm started going off again. The dining room had been transformed into what could charitably be called a rustic dinner setting, and more accurately described as the aftermath of a Martha Stewart fever dream. Rose had apparently decided that simple meant using every candle in the house, draping the chandelier with what appeared to be her collection of vintage doilies, and placing small bouquets of flowers from the garden at intervals that suggested she'd been decorating by throwing them from across the room. Wow, Alexander said, surveying the scene as they entered. This is Comprehensive. That's one word for it, Madison murmured, watching her mother's eye twitch as she took in the creative liberties Rose had taken with the family china. The good Wedgwood was mixed with everyday plates, creating a pattern that looked like it had been arranged by someone with strong opinions about conventional place settings and a determination to ignore them all. "I wanted to make it special," Rose announced, emerging from the kitchen wearing an apron that read, "Caution, cook at work," and carrying a serving dish that was smoking ominously. "Alexander, sweetie, you sit right there next to Madison. I arranged the seating specially so you two can get acquainted." Madison glanced at the chairs Rose was indicating and noticed with growing alarm that they had been pushed significantly closer together than dining etiquette typically required. In fact, they were close enough that she and Alexander would practically be sharing an armrest. "Grandma," she said carefully, "are you sure that's not a little cozy? Nonsense. How are you supposed to fall in love if you're sitting on opposite sides of the table like strangers at a business meeting?" Rose set down the smoking dish with a flourish. "Besides, I read in one of my magazines that proximity is very important for building romantic connections. Something about pheromones and shared personal space." Alexander shot Madison a look that was equal parts amused and alarmed. "Your grandmother reads relationship advice magazines?" "Apparently she also applies the advice," Madison replied, settling into her designated chair and immediately becoming aware that Alexander's cologne smelled like cedar and something else that made her want to lean closer, which was probably exactly what Rose had been counting on. "I don't just read them," Rose said proudly, bustling back toward the kitchen. "I take notes. Very scientific approach to matchmaking. Now let me get the rest of dinner before everything gets cold, or catches fire, whichever comes first." Victoria took her seat with the careful movements of someone trying not to disturb a delicate ecosystem. "Mother Rose, please tell me you didn't actually try to flambe anything." "Well, technically I tried to unflambe something," Rose called from the kitchen. "But I think I got it under control." Robert emerged from his study carrying what appeared to be a small fire extinguisher, which he placed discreetly beside his chair. "Just in case," he explained to Alexander's questioning look. "Your family certainly keeps things interesting," Alexander observed, leaning closer to Madison than was strictly necessary. She caught another whiff of that cologne and felt her concentration scatter like leaves in a windstorm. "Interesting is definitely one way to put it," she managed, trying to ignore the fact that his proximity was making her pulse do things that were probably visible from space. "Though I should warn you that dinner with Rose is less of a meal and more of a survival exercise. I'm beginning to get that impression." "Should I be concerned about the smoke coming from that serving dish?" Madison glanced at the platter Rose had set down, which was indeed releasing a steady stream of what appeared to be steam, though it could have been smoke or possibly some kind of vapor that hadn't been discovered by science yet. "Probably," she admitted. "But on the bright side, if we survive the meal, we'll have a great story to tell our—" She stopped abruptly, realizing what she'd been about to say. "Our—" Alexander prompted with a smile that suggested he knew exactly what she'd almost said. "Our therapists," she finished weakly. "Assuming we need therapy after this experience." "Oh, we definitely will." Rose reappeared carrying a large covered casserole dish and wearing an expression of supreme confidence that Madison had learned to recognize as a warning sign of impending disaster. "I hope everyone's hungry," she announced, setting the dish in the center of the table with ceremonial importance. "I made my famous beef bourguignon. Well, it's not exactly traditional beef bourguignon. I made a few creative substitutions." "What kind of substitutions?" Victoria asked, with the wariness of someone who had learned that Rose's creativity in the kitchen often resulted in visits from various emergency services. "Oh, just little improvements. I replaced the wine with grape juice because I thought it would be fresher, and instead of regular mushrooms, I used those interesting ones I found growing behind the garden shed." The silence that followed was so complete that Madison could hear the smoke alarm in the kitchen beeping softly in the distance, as if it were trying to warn them from afar. "Grandma," Madison said slowly, "please tell me you didn't actually use random mushrooms from outside." "Of course not, dear." Rose looked offended. "I looked them up in my gardening book first. It said they were perfectly safe, though it did mention something about potential side effects, but I'm sure that was just legal mumbo-jumbo." Alexander turned to Madison with raised eyebrows. Side effects? The book mentioned they might cause mild hallucinations, Rose continued cheerfully, lifting the lid off the casserole dish to reveal what appeared to be a bubbling mass of questionable origin. But only in large quantities, and I only used a small handful. Or two, maybe three. Victoria stood up so quickly her chair nearly toppled backward. Mother Rose, you cannot serve potentially hallucinogenic mushrooms to our dinner guests. They're not hallucinogenic, Rose protested. They're just mildly psychoactive. There's a difference. Besides, the book said they were traditionally used in medieval wedding ceremonies to help couples see their true compatibility. Madison felt her head begin to spin, and not from any mushrooms. Medieval wedding ceremonies? Oh yes, very romantic tradition. The bride and groom would share a special meal and then have visions that would show them their future together. I thought it would be perfect for you two. Alexander leaned over to Madison and whispered, "Is your grandmother trying to drug us?" "I think she's trying to give us a mystical experience," Madison whispered back. Which, knowing my family, probably amounts to the same thing. Robert cleared his throat with the authority of someone who had dealt with Rose's creative cooking before. "Mother Rose, I think we should perhaps save the experimental cuisine for another occasion. Maybe something that doesn't require consultation with poison control." "Poison control?" Rose looked genuinely hurt. "It's not poison. It's just adventurous seasoning. Besides, I already made dessert, too. A lovely herbal tea blend that's supposed to promote bonding and relaxation." Madison felt Alexander tense beside her. "What kind of herbs?" "Oh, chamomile, lavender, a little valerian root for calming effects. And I may have added some of those pretty purple flowers from the garden, the ones that smell so lovely." Victoria sank back into her chair with the expression of someone who had just realized that her mother-in-law was either a secret alchemist or completely unhinged. "What purple flowers, Mother Rose?" "The ones by the back fence. They have such a nice, sweet smell, though they did make me feel a little drowsy when I was picking them." The family stared at Rose in collective horror as the implications of her garden-to-table approach to dinner preparation became clear. "Grandma," Madison said carefully, "those purple flowers, are they the ones that bloom all summer and attract all the bees?" "Yes. Aren't they lovely?" "Those are lavender bushes, Grandma. The good news is they're not dangerous. The bad news is you've basically created a medieval sedative." Alexander started laughing, not the polite chuckle of someone trying to be diplomatic, but genuine, helpless laughter that seemed to bubble up from somewhere deep inside. "I'm sorry," he gasped when he could speak again. "It's just, I came here expecting a formal dinner with my arranged almost fiancé, and instead I'm getting a medieval mystical experience with potentially consciousness-altering vegetables and artisanal sedatives. This is hands down the most entertaining evening I've had in years." Madison stared at him. "You're not horrified?" "Horrified? Are you kidding? This is amazing. When was the last time you had dinner that came with the possibility of visions and spiritual revelations? My family's idea of exciting dinner conversation is debating whether the stock market will close up or down." Rose beamed with vindication. "See? I told you he was perfect for our family. He appreciates creativity." "I think what he appreciates is chaos," Madison said, but she was smiling despite herself. There was something unexpectedly charming about Alexander's willingness to find humor in her family's particular brand of insanity. "Well, chaos does keep things interesting," Alexander admitted. "Though I should probably ask, are there any other surprise ingredients I should know about, just so I can update my will accordingly?" "Oh, don't be dramatic," Rose waved dismissively. "The worst that could happen is a little drowsiness, and maybe some very vivid dreams. Though I suppose there's a small chance you might temporarily see auras around people. But that sounds rather nice, doesn't it?" Madison buried her face in her hands. "I cannot believe we're having this conversation. I can't believe I'm enjoying it so much," Alexander replied. "Madison, look at me." She lifted her head to find him watching her with an expression that was warm and genuinely amused, without a trace of the polite horror she'd expected. "Are you seriously not running for the hills right now?" she asked. "Are you kidding? And miss finding out what your grandmother has planned for dessert? I wouldn't dream of it." He paused, his expression growing more serious. "Besides, I'm beginning to think that a family that cares enough to drug their dinner guests in the name of romance might be exactly what I've been missing." Madison felt something flutter in her chest, that had nothing to do with potentially psychoactive mushrooms and everything to do with the way Alexander was looking at her, like she was something precious and amusing and worth getting to know, chaos and all. "You know," she said slowly, "when my parents first told me about this arrangement, I thought it was the worst thing that could possibly happen to me. And now I'm thinking it might be the most interesting thing that's ever happened to me." Rose clapped her hands together with delight. "Oh, this is wonderful! You're already bonding, and you haven't even tried the bourguignon yet." Victoria stood up with renewed determination. "That's it. We're ordering pizza. Mother Rose, you are banned from the kitchen for the rest of the evening." "But what about my herbal tea?" "We'll stick to regular tea, the kind that comes from a box and doesn't require a medical disclaimer." Robert nodded in agreement. "I'll call Gino's. They deliver, and they've never once tried to alter anyone's consciousness with their marinara sauce." As her parents bustled off to arrange normal, non-mystical food, Madison found herself alone with Alexander and Rose, who was still eyeing her experimental casserole with disappointment. "I was so sure it would work," Rose sighed. The medieval cookbook made it sound so romantic. "You have a medieval cookbook?" Alexander asked with interest. "Oh yes, I collect vintage recipe books. I have everything from 1400s feast preparations to 1960s gelatin salads. Cooking is cooking, regardless of the century." Madison watched Alexander listen to her grandmother with genuine attention, asking questions about her collection and showing real interest in her stories about historical cooking methods. There was no condescension, no polite tolerance, just authentic curiosity about an elderly woman's unusual hobby. Something warm and unexpected settled in Madison's chest as she watched them interact. Alexander wasn't just being polite, he was actually engaging with Rose as a person, not dismissing her as an eccentric old lady. In Madison's experience, most people either humored Rose or avoided her entirely. Alexander seemed to genuinely appreciate her enthusiasm, even when it resulted in potentially hazardous dinner experiences. "You know," Madison said when there was a lull in their conversation about the evolution of spice usage in European cuisine, "I owe you an apology." Alexander turned to her with surprise. "For what?" "For assuming you'd be some stuffy, entitled trust fund prince who'd run screaming the moment things got weird. You're actually pretty wonderful." Rose practically vibrated with excitement. "Oh, this is perfect. You're already seeing each other's true qualities. Maybe the mushrooms are working after all." Madison and Alexander looked at each other and burst into laughter again, and this time when their eyes met, Madison felt something shift between them, something real and warm and completely unexpected. Maybe arranged marriages weren't the worst idea in the world after all, especially when they came with a side of medieval mysticism and a grandmother who believed that love was worth a little calculated chaos. "You know what, Grandma?" Madison said, reaching over to squeeze Rose's hand. "Maybe you're on to something with this whole matchmaking thing." Rose's smile could have powered the entire East Coast. "Of course I am, dear, though next time I think I'll stick to less adventurous ingredients. We want to encourage romance, not require medical supervision." Alexander grinned. "Where's the fun in that?" And as they sat there laughing together, surrounded by the remnants of Rose's well-intentioned disaster, Madison realized that sometimes the best things in life came disguised as complete chaos. She was just lucky enough to find someone who appreciated the chaos as much as she did. 3 weeks had passed since the great dinner disaster of Friday evening, and Madison found herself in the peculiar position of actually looking forward to seeing Alexander again. They'd had coffee twice, lunch once, and a surprisingly enjoyable evening at a charity gala where the only flying objects had been champagne corks, a vast improvement over appetizers. What surprised her most was how easy it had become to talk to him. Alexander had a way of listening that made her feel like her thoughts actually mattered, and his dry sense of humor perfectly complemented her own tendency towards sarcasm. He'd even started texting her random observations throughout the day, like, "Saw a pigeon wearing what appeared to be a tiny business suit. Thought you'd appreciate the commitment to professional attire." Madison was beginning to suspect that arranged marriages might not be the archaic torture she'd initially imagined. In fact, she was beginning to suspect that she might actually be falling for this guy, which was both thrilling and terrifying in roughly equal measure. She was contemplating this possibility while getting ready for Sunday brunch at the family estate when her phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. Fair warning. I may need witness protection after today's brunch. My mother is bringing her own silverware, just in case. Madison laughed and typed back. Your mother clearly doesn't understand that chaos is a feature, not a bug, of Blackwell family gatherings. Grandma Rose has been mysteriously quiet all week, which honestly worries me more than her usual mayhem. Should I be concerned about the quiet? Came his immediate response. With Rose, quiet usually means she's planning something spectacular. But don't worry, I'll protect you from any flying cutlery or experimental cuisine. My hero, he texted back, followed by a heart emoji that made Madison's pulse skip in a way that was definitely not appropriate for a fake romantic arrangement. Except, she was beginning to realize, it didn't feel fake anymore. Madison arrived at the family estate to find Alexander's sleek BMW already in the driveway, parked next to what appeared to be a catering truck. This was either a very good sign or a very bad sign, depending on whether Rose had been allowed anywhere near the catering arrangements. She found Alexander in the foyer, looking remarkably relaxed for someone about to brave another Blackwell family meal. He was wearing a navy sweater that brought out his eyes and made her temporarily forget how to form coherent sentences. You made it, she said, hoping she sounded more composed than she felt. Barely. Your grandmother ambushed me at the front door with something she called a pre-brunch appetite enhancer. I'm afraid to ask what was in it. Was it fizzy? Alarmingly so. Then it was probably her homemade ginger ale. The good news is it's not psychoactive. The bad news is it has enough sugar to power a small aircraft. Before Alexander could respond, Rose appeared at the top of the grand staircase like a theatrical director making her entrance. She was wearing what appeared to be her finest Sunday dress, a vintage number in powder blue that probably cost more than most people's cars, and carrying what looked suspiciously like a photo album. Alexander, darling, she called out, descending the stairs with the graceful authority of someone who had been making grand entrances since the Eisenhower administration. Perfect timing. I have something wonderful to show you both. Madison felt a familiar sense of foreboding settle in her stomach. Grandma, please tell me you're not about to show us baby pictures. Better! Rose reached the bottom of the stairs and opened the album with ceremonial flourish. I've been documenting your courtship. Look at these marvelous photographs. She thrust the album toward them, and Madison found herself staring at a collection of candid photos that spanned the past 3 weeks. There was a picture of her and Alexander at the coffee shop, heads bent together over some shared joke. Another of them walking through the park after lunch, Madison's hand gesturing animatedly while Alexander listened with obvious attention. A third of them at the charity gala, dancing and looking remarkably comfortable in each other's arms. Grandma, Madison said slowly, when did you take these pictures? Oh, I didn't take them, dear, Rose said cheerfully. I hired a photographer. Professional documentation is very important for preserving family memories. Besides, I wanted to make sure I captured all the special moments. Alexander looked up from the album with an expression somewhere between amusement and disbelief. You hired a photographer to follow us around? Of course. How else was I supposed to document the success of my matchmaking? Though I must say, you two made it remarkably easy. Look at this one from the coffee shop. You can practically see the sparks flying. Madison stared at the photograph Rose was indicating. In it, she and Alexander were leaning across the small cafe table, both laughing at something. Their faces close enough that they could have been mistaken for a couple who'd been together for years, rather than strangers fulfilling a family obligation. We do look, Madison trailed off, not sure how to finish that sentence. Happy, Alexander completed quietly. We look happy. Exactly, Rose beamed with triumph. Which brings me to my announcement. The foreboding in Madison's stomach intensified. What announcement? Well, since my matchmaking has been such a spectacular success, I've decided to share my methods with the world. I'm writing a book, Love Through Creative Chaos, A Grandmother's Guide to Successful Matchmaking. I've already got interest from 3 publishers. Madison felt the blood drain from her face. A book? Oh yes. And the best part is, I'm using you two as my primary case study. All those little mishaps and accidents that brought you together, the spilled julep at the country club, the flying appetizers, the medieval dinner experiment, They're all going to be featured as examples of my revolutionary approach to romance. Alexander was very still beside her. Little mishaps and accidents? Well, they weren't exactly accidents, Rose admitted with the sheepish pride of someone confessing to a particularly clever crime. I may have orchestrated things just a tiny bit. The silence that followed was so complete that Madison could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, each second marking another moment of dawning realization. Orchestrated, Madison repeated carefully. How orchestrated? Rose's expression shifted to something between guilty pleasure and outright mischief. Well, you remember how I accidentally spilled my julep on Alexander at the country club? You said you bumped into him, Alexander said slowly. I did bump into him, very deliberately. I'd been watching you for 20 minutes, trying to work up the nerve to introduce myself. When I saw you heading toward the bar, I positioned myself perfectly for maximum collision impact. Madison stared at her grandmother. You stalked him? I prefer strategic observation, and it worked perfectly. One carefully timed collision, and I had the perfect excuse to start a conversation and find out everything I needed to know about his character. Which, by the way, is excellent. Most young men would have been furious about the dry cleaning bill. Alexander was looking at Rose with the fascination of someone watching a master criminal explain their methodology. What about the flying appetizers on Friday night? Rose's smile turned positively mischievous. Well, I may have practiced that particular maneuver several times in the kitchen to get the trajectory just right. The trick is to catch your foot on the rug at exactly the right angle to achieve maximum appetizer dispersal while ensuring the young man has time to play hero. You practiced falling down? Madison's voice had risen to what her college roommate used to call her courtroom cross-examination pitch. I prefer to call it choreographed stumbling, and it worked beautifully. Alexander caught me like a perfect gentleman, got covered in food like a good sport, and you both started bonding over the shared experience of surviving my cooking. Textbook romantic catalyst. Madison sank onto the foyer bench, her mind reeling. The medieval dinner. The psychoactive mushrooms. Completely harmless garden variety mushrooms from the grocery store, Rose admitted cheerfully. Though I did add a few drops of vanilla extract to make them smell more mysterious. The real secret was the power of suggestion. People will believe almost anything if you present it with enough confidence. And the herbal tea? Alexander asked, apparently too fascinated to be properly outraged. Chamomile and lavender, exactly as advertised. Though I may have exaggerated the sedative properties for dramatic effect. The goal was to create a sense of shared adventure, not actual unconsciousness. Madison looked up at her grandmother, who was standing there with the satisfied expression of someone who had just revealed the solution to an elaborate puzzle. Grandma, she said slowly, are you telling us that every single disaster over the past month was completely intentional? Not every disaster, Rose protested. The smoke alarm going off during dinner was a genuine accident. I may have gotten a little too enthusiastic with the broiler, but everything else? Carefully planned romantic interventions designed to give you two a foundation of shared experiences and mutual laughter. Alexander started laughing, the same rich, genuine laughter that had made Madison's pulse skip during their first meeting. This is incredible. You've been running a romantic operation worthy of the CIA and we never suspected a thing. Well, Madison did get suspicious about the quiet, Rose admitted. But by then it was too late. You were already falling for each other. Madison felt her cheeks flush. We weren't. It's not like we… Madison, Alexander said gently, turning to face her fully. Can I ask you something? She nodded, not trusting her voice. If this whole arrangement hadn't been arranged, if we just met at a coffee shop or a bookstore or anywhere normal, would you have given me a chance? Madison looked at him, really looked at him, taking in his patient expression and kind eyes, and the way he was waiting for her answer, like it actually mattered to him. Honestly, she said finally, probably not. You're exactly the kind of guy I would have written off as too perfect, too polished, too good to be true. I would have assumed you were either boring or hiding something terrible. Alexander's smile was soft and a little sad. And now? Now I know you're not hiding anything terrible. You're just hiding the fact that you think my crazy family is charming instead of certifiable, and you're definitely not boring. So what you're saying is that your grandmother's elaborate schemes actually worked. Madison glanced over at Rose, who was watching them with the satisfied expression of a master chess player who had just announced checkmate. "I'm saying," Madison said slowly, "that I think I might be falling in love with you, and I'm not sure whether to thank my grandmother or have her committed for psychological evaluation." "Why not both?" Alexander suggested. And then he was kissing her, right there in the foyer under the crystal chandelier that had witnessed 3 generations of family drama, and was now witnessing the successful conclusion of Rose's most ambitious matchmaking project. When they broke apart, Rose was applauding with the enthusiasm of someone who had just watched her favorite team win the championship. "Oh, this is perfect," she exclaimed. "Absolutely perfect. The book is going to end on such a high note." Madison looked at Alexander, who was looking back at her with an expression that made her heart do things that definitely couldn't be attributed to experimental cooking. "You know," she said, "I'm beginning to think that arranged marriages might not be such a bad idea after all, as long as they come with a grandmother who's willing to orchestrate elaborate romantic conspiracies. Especially then." Rose clapped her hands together with delight. "Speaking of which, I should probably mention that I've already started planning the wedding. I found the most wonderful venue, a lovely garden that specializes in controlled chaos. Very romantic, very photogenic, and completely fireproof." Madison and Alexander looked at each other and burst into laughter. "Grandma," Madison said when she could breathe again, "I think we can handle the wedding planning ourselves." "Oh, nonsense," Rose waved dismissively. "You two focus on falling deeper in love. Leave the creative logistics to someone with experience. Besides," she added with a wink, "I've got a reputation to maintain. The final chapter of my book needs to be absolutely spectacular." As Rose bustled off toward the dining room, muttering about floral arrangements and strategically placed obstacles, Madison turned back to Alexander. "Any second thoughts about marrying into this family?" she asked. Alexander grinned and pulled her closer. "Are you kidding? I can't wait to see what your grandmother has planned for our honeymoon." "Please don't give her any ideas," Madison said, but she was smiling as she said it. Because sometimes, she was learning, the best things in life came disguised as complete chaos. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, that chaos came with a silver-haired mastermind who believed that love was worth a little creative intervention. "You know what the really crazy part is?" Alexander said as they walked toward the dining room, where the sound of Rose directing the catering staff could be heard through the doors. "What? I'm pretty sure I would have fallen for you anyway, flying appetizers or no flying appetizers. Your grandmother just accelerated the process." Madison felt something warm and perfect settle in her chest. Good thing she did. Otherwise, we might have wasted months on normal dating. "Normal is overrated," Alexander agreed, and kissed her again, just as Rose's voice carried through the dining room doors. "Now remember, the centerpieces need to look elegant, but destructible. We want to leave room for spontaneous romantic moments." Madison and Alexander looked at each other and started laughing all over again. After all, why settle for a normal love story when you could have one written by Grandma Rose?